But even a quick glance at this psalm in your English Bible shows an ancient Hebrew pattern. David uses 7 different means to praise the Lord. I don't know if you counted them as I was reading through it. 7 as in a complete set. Just glance down. I want to show you what I mean by this. Look at verse 3. First, David uses his lips to speak of God's love that is kind and true. He says, because your loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise you. Secondly, verse 4. He harnesses his tongue to bless God. He says, I will bless you while I live. Thirdly, in verse 4 at the end, he says, his hands are going to be pointed to God that he seeks and loves. He says, I will lift up my hands. So he's got, so far, 3 different parts of his body. Fourthly, he uses his will to intentionally make a declaration of God's worthiness. He says, verse 5, my soul will be satisfied. He says, I am choosing, even though everything around me isn't something that promotes satisfaction. My soul, I'm making an internal, conscious, willful choice that my soul will be satisfied. Fifthly, he speaks with his mouth, and he praises God that he loves. He says, my mouth, in verse 5 at the end, will praise you with joyful lips. Sixth, David uses his mind to remember. He says, when I remember you on my bed, he says, I'm going to use my mind. And seventhly, he uses his intellect to meditate. He says, I want to meditate on your character. At the end of verse 6, he says, I'm going to meditate on you in the night watches. So David is saying, I'm going to use every one of the faculties God gave me in seeking you. Is that where we are? Going to use every faculty you have to seek the Lord? I see people using every faculty they have to seek other things. You want to see something interesting? Go down to Best Buy and watch the kids gathered around the new PlayStation. I mean, they just are looking at that thing. Parents can walk in front of them. They can put their hands in front of them. They are absolutely mesmerized. They've got every faculty, their body, their mind, their lips. They are so excited. Does that happen when you're reading the Bible? Can someone walk in front of you and spill coffee and you don't even notice them? That's how it was with David. It was a chosen state. Those kids are mesmerized because they choose to be. David chose. Since childhood, we have been taught that we have far more capacity in our brains than we ever use. In fact, most doctors say the average human uses at the most 10% of their brain. Haven't you heard that? Didn't your teacher tell you that? You guys you hardly use the 10%, like that. Well, we're challenged by our culture to never stop learning. They say that the older we get, that we can, up the few percentage points through life by having continuing education, having stimulations and hobbies and reading. But in a vastly more strategic way, God is saying through David, why not start employing more and more of your capacity to worship God? If we only use 10% of our mind just to go through life, we've got an awful lot of us that we could harness for the worship of God that never gets used. What I think David used a lot of his bandwidth in the pursuit and the worship of God. We should regularly use our lips, our tongue, our hands, our will, our mouth, our mind, and our intellect to the max in seeking to worship God. Why? Because only God can satisfy. You know what loneliness really is precipitated by? This underlying dissatisfaction we have. And when everything is not loud and spinning and running and going our way, all of a sudden we come back to our unsatisfied longings. And you see, David had dealt with that because he knew only God can satisfy. One of the most fundamental truths from this psalm is that God can satisfy us to the very core of our existence and being. That is David's 3,000-year-old testimony. He was as human as anyone can get. David reflects every virtue and every vice. He struggled with fear, depression, and lust. And yet he can sing with abandon and worship with passion and meditate into the very throne room of God. All of us can identify with the struggles, which we can also learn in our pursuit of God. See, David's struggles and his defeats and his terrible, horrible, murderous, lustful, all that stuff that's in the Bible, didn't permanently keep him from this pursuit of God, because only God can satisfy. David is showing us the lifelong opportunity we can have of pursuing God. God is an exhaustless supply of new satisfaction. He is a well that will never run dry. He is a spring that always wells up within us, fresh, life-giving water. Every desire, even our deepest, can be satisfied by Him. Do you remember the 1,600-year-old words of St. Augustine or Augustine? It's been quoted over and over again. Augustine said this, "Our hearts are restless till they find rest in Thee." Do you know what this psalm says? Do you know what David is saying? David says, "I am completely satisfied by God, with God, and in God." David says, "I have experienced what God has offered and promised, and God cannot hold Himself back from anyone who will seek Him." Do you understand that the aggressor is God? He's just looking for us to open our heart. And the eyes of the Lord, remember, are running to and fro, looking for one whose heart is toward Him. And James put it this way. He says, draw near to God. That's a one-time act. And He will continuously be drawing near to you. He said, if you just say, "I want you," whoa, He comes. Because God desires to reveal Himself to us. God is found by those who seek Him with all their heart. And David says, yes, that's what I've experienced.